A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICAN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. So yesterday we have deliberately not uploaded the video because it used to be late night by the time I would upload the video. So I wanted to record with a fresh mind. So from now on you will get the video in the morning, and for that we'll need to have a 1 day lag in the newspapers like we had before. So Friday and Saturday will be uploaded on Monday morning. So today we'll be discussing the Thursday's newspaper. We will start the day with the quote of the day. So it's said by APJ Abdul Kalam. It says that if you salute your duty, you need not salute anybody. But if you pollute your duty, you will have to salute everybody. So this shows the importance that integrity has when we perform our duties. If we perform our duties with due diligence, with integrity, honesty, with all that sincerity and commitment, we don't have to beg anybody. We don't have to go in front of anybody and tell them to save you or anything. You can do what you feel is upright, and you can uphold the constitutional principles. You can also be empathetic and objective. But on the other hand, if we do not follow all of these things, rather we favor our kith and kin, we end up doing some corruption, then we will have to salute everybody in order to save us. We will have to go to our bosses and plead to save us. So then we will have to salute everybody. So this shows the importance of integrity in performance of our duties. So this quote you can use while answering your ethics questions. Even in the case studies, when they say that your boss is pressuring you, so what should you do? So one option that is more often than not given is to accept what the boss is saying and just go by what is happening. So in those case studies, while explaining your stance, you can you can just put these small quotes in between, which can make your answers more stronger and more convincing. So with this, we will start with the first topic of the day, which is regarding the India-China relations. So what is new in this regard is that now India has announced a scheme under which India will be developing the border infrastructure So we already know that there is a border area development program. So this was allocated rupees 784 crores in the fiscal 2020-21. So this border area development program is now being used to 10% of the funds will be specifically used to develop the border infrastructure in the India-China border itself. So the funds are going to be used in Ladakh, Arunachal Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand and Sikkim. So again, what is going to be developed is including roads or bridges, even stadiums, community health centers, primary schools, and all of that will be included in the border area development program in the India-China border. So this will help integrate these border areas with the rest of India, with the hinterland, and it will also create a positive perception among the people in these border areas. So mostly people do not like to stay in the border areas. So this better development of infrastructure will even encourage the people to stay in the border areas, and they will also feel more safe and secure. This is also good for strategic deployment of forces also, because one way where we were lacking in the border management when it comes to China is that we didn't have that border logistics. So because of which troop deployment and monitoring across the LAC was very difficult for us. So now we have realized the importance of this, and now a specific amount is going to be spent on this to improve the border infrastructure in the India-China border. We'll go to the next topic, which is G7 to G11. So the news here was that basically there are these G8 countries. So G8 countries are the highly industrialized countries, which include United States, Canada, Russia, France, Germany, Italy, Japan. So these were the highly industrialized countries that were included in G8. But after Russia annexed Crimea, Russia was removed from this G8 and it had become G7. Now Donald Trump has come with a proposal that this G7 will have to be expanded to G11, because he says this G7 is mostly outdated. So therefore we need to have G11, which will also include India, Russia again, South Korea and Australia. So on the one hand, it is very it's very important to see that India has been given this recognition that it is one of the important players in the global level, and therefore it has been included in Donald Trump's idea of G11. But at the same time, before if and when the meeting of G11 gets decided, then what should be India's stance? What should India's opinion be on this, on being a part of G11? First of all, we need to weigh the pros and cons. The first thing is that if we look at these countries, India, Russia, South Korea, and Australia, so and also Donald Trump's intention to expand it from G7 to G11, it is clear that it's excluding China in the region. So the sole purpose seems to be to exclude China. So first thing that India should weigh is that this whole initiative appears to be kind of fueling a new Cold War between United States and China. Even when the first Cold War started, India took over the principle of non-alignment movement, and it did not join with either of the blocs. So it was not a part of the Cold War that time. So should India be the part of this Cold War now? So should it escalate this Cold War tensions already there between United States and China? That is the first thing that India will have to weigh before it joins G11. The second thing is that now this G11 will happen only when the G7 is expanded. So for that, we have to evaluate whether G7 was itself effective or not. So if G7 itself was not effective, just by expanding it to G11 will not make it effective also. So when it comes to G7, its functioning has not been very effective. When we consider the members, there have been very deep differences on various issues like climate change and on the position in Iran, or even in the security contributions. On all of these things, the countries in the G7 had wide differences among one another. So even last year in France, when the meeting took place, this grouping was unable to issue a joint declaration because there were so much of differences between the members. So now just by expanding it to G11, is it going to be effective? So that is another question that India should ask itself before it decides to be part of G11. So now with this, move to the next topic, which is regarding the parliament. So why this article was there is because, first of all, because of COVID, the parliament has not been able to meet. So in this context, the article is comparing various other countries where through video conferencing the sessions have been held, because at the time of COVID, which is an emergency situation, several steps have been taken by the government, which includes lakhs of crores of money. So in this regard, it has become all the more important now to hold the government to account for whatever steps it is taking. So in this regard, the article mentions about the Canadian Parliament. So the Canadian Parliament had also had its session through video conferencing, where 280 out of the 338 members of the Canadian Parliament had attended the session. So similarly, even the British Parliament adopted a hybrid model where some of them attended in person and the others attended through video conferencing. Why? Because we need to follow the physical distancing norms, so it is not possible for everybody to attend. So it was a combination of two. Similarly, several other countries have followed this hybrid model where some are attending in person and some are attending through video conferencing. So in this regard, why Indian Parliament is not meeting is the question. So when you look at B.R. Ambedkar, he said that during the Constituent Assembly debates, when he was asked why a parliamentary form of government and not a presidential form of government, the reply was that though presidential form of government gives a more stability, but parliamentary form of government is going to hold the government accountable to the parliament. So accountability is very important in a developing country, in a country in transition. So there will be checks on the parliament through debates, questions, motions and all that. So this is very important in a parliamentary democracy. But now all the actions of the government are going unscrutinized. So now we know that under Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, so much of money is now being expended, but it is not getting subject to parliamentary scrutiny or parliamentary approval. So we say that we are the world's largest democracy on the one hand. So, and the second thing is also that we are the IT providers to the world. So then we cannot say that we have some issues while holding the parliamentary sessions online or through video conferencing. So therefore it's high time that we have parliamentary sessions. Technology is all ours, and we are also the world's largest democracy. So we should not waste any more time and rather hold parliamentary sessions through video conferencing or through this hybrid model, so that the actions of the government are held to be accounted. We'll move on to the next topic. So these were there was one more article on China and a second article on China and on Manrega. So these were basically repetitions of what we had already discussed. So I'm not dealing with them. The next topic is giving free power to the farmers. So now in order to improve agriculture, farmers have been given free powers so that they can run the pump sets, they can extract water, and that will help them in irrigation. But however, this has led to several problems also, and we have come to a point where this is now being deliberated upon. So we will see why free power to the farmers should or should not be given. So when we say free power should, yes, it should be given. The reason that we have is, one is food security. So only when irrigation is possible, only then the food can be grown. So food security is one reason why free power should continue to be given to farmers. The second one is the agrarian distress. So already there is a lot of agrarian distress. So if free power is also not given, then it will lead to much more distress in the agricultural sector. The third thing is the climate change. So because of climate change, the availability of water for irrigation even in general, the rainfall the pattern has been very variant and very fluctuating. So in this case, free power to farmers will enable them to plan their agricultural activities, so that independent of the monsoon, they are able to decide when they want to sow anything, so that they know that water is available for irrigation. So these are the main reasons why free power to the farmers will have to be given in the future also. But there are several arguments why free power should not be given to farmers. The first thing is that it more often than not acts as a vote bank. So when the elections are about to come, then free power is announced to the farmers. So this is mostly acting as a vote bank, so which is against the principles of parliamentary democracy. So that is one thing why it should be done away with. The second thing is, if we look at the southern states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Punjab in the north, so their combined power subsidy bills, because of providing free power to the farmers, has amounted to 33,000 crore. Now imagine that during the COVID crisis, already the states are suffering from so much of resource crunch. So can we really afford this much of power subsidy bill, just because we are providing free electricity to farmers? So the same resource could be used for other better purposes also. The third reason is that because electricity is being provided free, there is a widespread wastage of electricity and water. Now something is provided free, then there is hardly any value to that. I hope it's not the case with ICANN. So wastage of water and electricity has become huge. So one scientist from Indian Statistical Institute, namely Bharat Ramaswamy, he has pointed out that India is the largest consumer of groundwater. So it uses 25 billion cubic meter of groundwater, and 251 billion cubic meter of groundwater, and this is more than the United States and China groundwater they draw combined. So 251 billion cubic meters that India is drawing, it's more than the combined drawing of United States and China. So therefore we are the largest consumers of groundwater, precisely because we have free electricity and nothing will stop us from extracting more groundwater. So this is leading to groundwater depletion. So a very valuable resource is getting wasted and is not being optimally used because of free electricity. So if you look at in Karnataka, for example, the farmers have started to run very high capacity pump sets. Again, these high capacity pump sets consume a lot of electricity. If electricity were not to be free, then farmers wouldn't have opted for high capacity pump sets. Now, just because electricity is free, they are able to get high capacity pump sets, and that is not just utilizing a lot of electricity. Again, these high capacity pump sets are much more powerful in depleting the groundwater. For instance, in Karnataka itself, 12 years before, the number of high capacity pump sets were just 17 lakh, and now it has become 30 lakh. So this shows how farmers are able to buy these pump sets just because electricity is free, and these have high capacity in extracting the groundwater. So it is leading to the depletion of groundwater resource also. At the same time, it is in many cases there is no feeder segregation. That means the line which goes to the farm and the line which goes to the farm household, there is no segregation, because electricity is free to the farmers for doing farming activities, but in the households it is not the case. But there is hardly any such a segregation that is being done. Because of this, the measurement of the exact consumption of electricity has also become tricky. So these are the reasons why we must stop giving free power to the farmers. Rather, the center has now asked the states to go for DBT instead of free power to the farmers. So now we need to weigh the pros and cons of giving DBT in the place of free power to the farmers before we decide to do that. So now we go to the next topic, which is imbalance in development. So the article was Bihar needs a state-specific stimulus. Basically, the article was wholly about Bihar and what can be done to improve the status of Bihar. But this whole content will be very much applicable for the northern states and the southern states comparison. So we know that the southern and the western states have progressed more, but the northern and the eastern states have not. So you may have a question why there is so much of imbalance in the regional development in India. So this particular article has given the answer to that question. So first, let us see why southern and western states are more developed. The first thing is that Ryotwari system. Why Ryotwari system? Because in these southern and western states, during the British colonial rule, the Ryotwari system was introduced, in which the deal was directly between the farmer and the East India Company. There was no intermediaries between the tenant and the state. So therefore, the feudal grip in these states are relatively very weak. So because of a weak feudal grip, these states also saw some social movements. For instance, the anti-Brahmin movement. So several such movements, social movements were seen in these parts of the country because the feudal grip was weaker. Why? Because of Ryotwari system, there were no intermediaries between the tenants and the farmer. So these social movements were again responsible for enlightening the people and making them realize what is important. So because of these reasons, the civil society started to develop in these areas. This civil society definitely made its voice heard when it comes to what is needed for development. That is the second thing. Third is that these states had accumulated some profits from the agriculture under the Ryotwari system. They had accumulated some agricultural profits. So what they did is they used the agricultural surplus that was invested in some productive investment. For example, in Andhra Pradesh, the Kammas, they had surplus agricultural produced, so they used that to invest in tobacco in the beginning, later in the films, and further later in the knowledge industry. So this accumulation of wealth because of one thing, like say productive agriculture, that wealth was introduced in further things like films or knowledge industry. So that is how the growth started to happen. The profits of one venture was ploughed into starting another productive venture. The next fourth reason why the southern and the western states have developed is that several experts were patronized by the states in these regions. For example, if you talk of Karnataka, the Wadiyar dynasty in Mysore, they patronized M. Vishveshwaraya. So Vishveshwaraya came out with a 5-year plan of 1925. So there was a kind of planned development because these experts were given a say. So that did not happen in the northern and eastern India. The fifth reason is that in these regions, several financial institutions were also promoted to ensure the success of the various projects that were started in these regions. For example, Bank of Baroda was started by Maharaja of Baroda. Similarly, Syndicate Bank was started by the TMA Pai. So like that, financial institutions were developed in these regions. The sixth reason is that land reforms. So soon after independence, these states also started also started coming out with meaningful land reforms where land were given to all the landless laborers. So this way they were also engaged in productive activities, and that is how the state as a whole could develop. So this was also another reason. And after this, one more reason was that, see, corruption was there even in northern as well as in the southern states. But the difference is that in the southern and western states, the corruption was basically output one. That means after a particular project has been completed, then the state government officials would take some money or some bribe from the beneficiaries of those projects. But in the northern and eastern states, the corruption was input based. That means whatever had to go into the project, in that input itself, people used to take the bribes or take their share. So that way the project itself never happened. So that was the difference in the corruption, in the nature of corruption between the southern and the northern states. And that's again another reason why the southern states were developed but not the northern states. So now we'll see why the northern states are underdeveloped. So the first reason is there is poor governance in these regions. So a strong governance is one of the most important factors why a particular region can develop. Second thing is that the civil society in these regions, it did not have a strategic vision or a development strategy for the region was absent in the case of civil society. The third reason was the deindustrialization that happened in these regions because of the East India Company. East India Company set up its own industries. So even when the natives did set up some of the Swadeshi industries, they didn't survive because for almost every industry that was set up, there was already a British competition. So this deindustrialization by East India Company had ruined several indigenous entrepreneurs. So that was ruined because of this. This is another reason why the northern states are less developed. Also, in the post-independence period, the policy of freed equalization was followed. So even these eastern and northern states are mineral rich, so they could have developed from the freed charges. But however, this policy of freed equalization did not allow that to happen in the case of these mineral rich regions. And fifth reason is that in these states, one of the most popular or the widespread social identity was of that of caste. So everything was based on caste, like caste-based politics. So because of the caste issues, where even between developmental programs, caste came in, and that is another reason why there was no development. And again, the sixth reason is that after independence, there was no meaningful land reforms. And seventh reason, as I had already told, is the difference in the nature of corruption. So in Bihar and other states, the corruption was input related, so the project itself was never completed. But in the southern states, it was turnover related. So only when the development work was completed, then there was extraction of payments from the direct beneficiaries. So at least the project got developed. So that is how the states also got developed. So these are the reasons why the northern states and eastern states are less developed, while the southern and the western states are more developed. So now we go to the next topic, which is India-Australia relations. So in this, we have already seen one article on India-Australia relations. So in this, first of all, the article talks about, again, this article was written by C. Raja Mohan. So the writer of the article, by that itself, the article becomes very important. So it first mentions about Australia's strengths from which India can learn. For instance, Australia has a very good set of natural resource base. So that is important for India. Australia has very good higher educational institutions. Then the scientific and technological innovations and the research that is happening in Africa is very good. And even the Africa's intelligence establishment is valued world over. So that these are some of the strengths of Australia from which India can learn. So when we talk of the relations, when India conducted its nuclear tests in 1998, after that there was complications between the two countries because Australia never saw that India can be a nuclear power, and testing of nuclear bombs means that there could be development of nuclear weapons and all that. So because of this, there were some complications in the relations. But from 2000 onwards, again, both the sides have made continuous efforts to improve the relations between the two countries. So now what all will be the areas for cooperation between the two countries? So some of the areas we have already seen in the last video. So one more area is the importance of diaspora. So Indian diaspora in Australia is nearly 7 lakh strong, and it is also the fastest growing diaspora. So this definitely becomes a very important area where the two can collaborate further. Second is that India and Australia are membership in several organizations, international forums. So they have a common membership. So this can be used to articulate their common interests and agenda for the whole grouping. For instance, they are part of the G20, they are part of East Asia Summit, they are part of Indian Ocean Rim Association, and also the Quad. So through these, they can increase the diplomatic cooperation on regional as well as on the global issues. So that is again where the area of cooperation is. Next is that several issues have now started to emerge. So host of emerging issues are there. So these includes, for instance, the recent WHO reforms where Australia had piloted that resolution which says that there must be inquiries in over China. So one is the WTO reforms, other is the 5G technology which is coming up. Then India and Australia were also part of the Solar Alliance. So strengthening the Solar Alliance is an important issue. Then climate change is definitely there, disasters are definitely there. So resilience in climate change, against climate change and disasters is another important area where the two countries can cooperate. So these are a host of emerging issues where the two countries can cooperate. The fourth is the security cooperation, particularly in the Indian Ocean. So Indo-Pacific has become that region which has received a lot of attention in the recent years. So security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific is extremely important for both the countries. So that is again there. And even in the last class we saw that during this virtual summit there are plans to sign the military logistics agreement. So this is also going to improve our defense related cooperation also. Then because both of us are part of the Indo-Pacific, then India and Australia can cooperate in the areas of maritime domain awareness, marine research and marine scientific research, and also in securing the sea lanes of communication. So these are the important areas where India and Australia can cooperate in the future. So with this, we will go to the next topic, which is related to vaccine development. So why this topic in news? Because now several countries are undertaking trials to come out with the COVID-19 vaccine so that millions of lives can be saved. So in this context, we must understand what is the importance of vaccines. So first is that because of vaccines, millions of lives are being saved because of vaccines. Now, for instance, if you see the highly contact versus smallpox, that was eradicated with the help of vaccines only. Smallpox used to kill at least 1 million children just a few decades ago, but now it has been eradicated. Similarly, with the help of vaccines, we were able to do away with the polio. India was declared as polio-free country by WHO in the year 2014 itself. So that is another thing. In 2015, India was declared that India has eliminated maternal and neonatal tetanus. So if we see that we have been able to eliminate so many diseases from the face of the world with the help of these vaccines. Through this, we have been saving millions of lives every year, particularly of children, because of highly contagious diseases also. So this is the importance when we talk about vaccines. The next thing is that, so what efforts are now being made towards developing the vaccines? The first thing we must understand is India is one of the largest producers and exporters of vaccines in the world. So that is one thing. And even in India, we have started Indradhanush, the immunization program, and vaccines are being manufactured by Indian companies also. And our manufacturing capacity is also being increased with the help of Make in India program But however, if we look at the research and development in the field of vaccine and innovation in the field of development of vaccine, so this innovation ecosystem for developing the new vaccines have somewhere been lagging behind. But definitely we have made several advances. For instance, the ICMR is now collaborating with Bharat Biotech International Limited in order to develop a fully indigenous COVID vaccine. So that is one thing which is being done. And also secondly, for another vaccine also, ICMR is collaborating with the Serum Institute of India and also the Oxford University, again related to the COVID-19 vaccine. So all of these things are being done. But as I said, that we are somewhere lacking because of the lack of that innovative ecosystem which is needed for vaccine research and development. So for that, what needs to be done, that the article says we need a triple helix model. Now this triple helix model, it means that we need to have cooperation and collaboration among the industry, among research institutes, and between the governments. So these three must always come together in the development of vaccines. So that is the most important thing. And apart from this, even ICMR is now in the process of setting up a National Institute of One Health. So this is also then, this institute will then also study regarding the zoonotic diseases. So that will help us in giving a lot of advances in those infections which are originating from the animals. So, and this triple helix model is very important, where government should support and encourage the research and the research sector. That is, the research in India should be bottom up. It should begin from the university level itself. So these universities will have to be encouraged to start research in public health issues. Similarly, industry collaboration is again very important. So all of these three collaborated efforts are only going to help us in making advances when it comes to vaccine development. So now we go to the next topic, which was regarding cyclone Nisarga. So we all know that cyclone Nisarga has made a landfall in Mumbai. And now why this topic becomes important is that it is again related to climate change. You can use it as an example. You can show how climate change is leading to those things which were not observed in the past. So it is said that the Indian Ocean is the fastest warming ocean in the world. So, but even when we talk of Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea is warming faster than the Bay of Bengal. So that is another thing. Because of this, that is another reason why this cyclone has now happened. And when we come to the Arabian Sea, there have been two things that have been observed. One is the observation by the scientists, and the other is the observation by the fishermen. So fishermen also, even in the past, they have seen that several commercially valuable species have vanished, and they have caught new kinds of species in their nets. So this again shows that because of the climate change and the rise in the sea surface temperature and all that, the species are now migrating to new places in search of a better habitat. So that is why they are also losing commercially valuable species while they are catching new species in their nets. So scientists have also told that on an average, there was less than one cyclone per year in the Arabian Sea. But if we talk of 2019, it was four cyclones were there in 2019, but on an average, there was less than one cyclone per year in the Arabian Sea. And also, when we talk of cyclones in the Arabian Sea, another factor that has been attributable to this is the fossil fuel emissions. So the aerosolized fossil fuel emissions, they have now migrated over to the Arabian Sea, and they hang over the Arabian Sea. So they will act as nucleus around which the clouds will be formed, and because of this, there will be more intense cyclones also. So that is one more reason, because of the fossil fuel emissions. And how these fossil fuel emissions will actually help in the cyclone, I have already explained it before. So this is also another reason why the cyclones are now developing in the Arabian Sea. So then what should be done in the future? When it comes to Mumbai, you see that the sky rise in Mumbai is mostly on the landfills, Then several roads, houses, airports are all built on the wetlands. So there is all the wetlands have been intruded upon. Then there is a lot of informal or squatter settlements also that are there, and blocked nalas are there. So all of these provides a conducive environment that if and when the cyclones become more frequent in the Arabian Sea and also more devastating, then there is going to be a lot of destruction to life and property in Mumbai because of all these reasons. So this article calls upon the urban planners in Mumbai to waste no time and start to work on these issues immediately. So next we will be discussing yesterday's question. So when we talk about the use of or the utility of the satellites or the space program in the socio-economic development in India. So first you will explain about the space program, which includes developing satellites, then developing the launch vehicles and using these satellites for socio-economic development. So this was the main purpose of the space program. So that you will elaborate, and then you will start by listing down the how it is helping in the socio-economic development. So we are in the era now of disasters. So in the case of disasters, these satellites will help in getting information about monsoon, about flood, about cyclones and all that. So in the case of disasters, they are very helpful. In the case of education, again very helpful through the INSAT 3D satellites. So education satellites, so these help in education sector also. TV channels are now available because of the INSAT 3D satellite, where education content is being imparted. And next is you can talk about the mineral resources. So how the satellites can help in knowing the location and the quantity of the mineral resources and even natural resources, that is made possible through remote sensing. So that you can tell. And then you can talk about agriculture. So how in the case of agriculture also the agriculture production, pest infestation, all of that can be studied from the, and how much crop what is the cropping. So all of that can be done with the help of the satellites, so that you can tell. Then even in the case of rural development, in fact now the concept of gramsat satellites have emerged, so that can provide basic requirements to the villages. So that can be again mentioned in your answer. And sixth, you can talk about these Gagan, and Gagan is actually helping in the airport authorities, that is the civil aviation sector, it is helping. So now we have IRNSS or Navik. So that is basically 7 satellites in geostationary and geosynchronous orbit, which is IRNSS, or which is now termed as Navik, is again helping in the civil aviation applications for better air traffic management in the Indian airspace. So that is also there. And then even the NHAI is using satellites to plan the, to map all the national highways in India. So for that it is called as the road asset management system. So for that also satellites are being used. Then satellites are used for urban planning also. So where and what is happening during disasters, again even for locating the victims and to recover and rehabilitate them. Also we are using satellites. When we talk of disasters, it is not just the conventional disasters, like even if we have some forest fires also. So even these are detected by the satellites and alerts are being sent. So you can cite some examples in the past where satellites are used for these purposes, even in the Uttarakhand forest fires and the floods that happened. So the satellites imagery helped a lot. And these many applications you can mention. And again I'll like to congratulate Akanksha Baghel, who has written a very beautiful answer for the question. And you can just add some more examples whenever you talk about satellites. Like if you're talking about remote sensing satellites, you can quote RISAT, Cartosat. So and about educational, then INSAT 3D. So again, so all of that things you can quote while writing your answer. So that will make a full-fledged answer. We'll see today's question. Discuss the application of biotechnology for socio-economic development. So it's a 10-mark question for 150 words. So that's it for today. Thank you.